This is Lysha Holmes, and I'm your host on the Recruitment podcast. And I am so excited to welcome to our global community today somebody who I had the absolute honour to interview in real life. If you have been following our channel for quite some time, this was one of our amazing guests for our in-person event that we hosted in the beautiful Birmingham in November 2024. And she might be familiar to you because she was at some point on our screens as a contestant on a very famous BBC show. But more importantly, if you are over on LinkedIn, I'm hoping you will be familiar with this inspiring, formidable, and very real, authentic business leader who transforms what we should all be thinking about in terms of ourselves and our team members, but also what we can do in terms of our greater community. So I'm bigging her up because I'm a major fan on a personal and professional level, and she knows that. So I'm not going to embarrass her anymore. Without further ado, welcome to the global community today, Scarlett Allen-Horton, who is the founder of Harper Fox, an altogether amazing person. How are you?
I mean, I'm on top of the world after that. Can you do that every morning for me, Lysha?
We'll just
I,
play this back.
I was thinking, I want to meet
Oh, but that's
her.
how I
Thank
feel
you so
about
much.
you. That is how I feel about you.
Likewise. We fangirled each other, but yeah, it's so amazing to be here. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
So there might be people clicking on who are, avid listeners of the podcast, or maybe just new to it, who maybe don't know who you are. So can you give us an introduction, biographies to who you are and what your business does?
Yeah, so my name is Scarlett. My name is Scarlett Allen-Horton. I am the very proud founder of Harper Fox Search Partners, and that is an executive search business. So we specialise in placing senior females, ethnic minorities at the top of STEM businesses globally. That's what we're very well known for. Ultimately, we are a boutique executive search firm. We've got three locations. So we've got two in the UK, one in the US. So we do a lot in international markets. I'm also business partner to Lord Sugar. I was on BBC The Apprentice. So sometimes people know me maybe from there. Very, very proud ambassador for We Are, which is a domestic abuse charity in Birmingham. And I am the ambassador for SmartWorks, which is the women's employment charity in the West Midlands as well. And I sit on a number of boards. We sit on one together, do judging, do keynoting, all the good stuff.
Absolutely. And it would be remiss of me as a fellow board advisor to the Recruitment Founders Club not to mention those amazing fellow advisors, founders, and obviously Greg and Lindsay, who have been on the podcast on a couple of occasions, actually, both individually and also together. So,
Yeah.
we do sit very proudly on that board, don't we?
That's what I said. We sit on boards and we sit together, which I yes.
There's so much to unpick. And I think I'd like to start almost at the beginning, really, because I think that as a founder and as a leader, you are operating in a sector and an industry which your whole premise and your whole purpose is around creating pathways for women and for female leaders to get to those top seats and potentially also create seats, as you have done,
Yeah,
as
founders.
creating
Yeah.
for founders. And you're also a mum to two daughters. And I just wonder where you see the trajectory in terms of the current narrative around, female leadership, the gender pay gap, where we are in terms of as recruitment leaders. Like where are we on this trajectory? Because there's a lot of noise about it, but where are you experiencing in real time in your industry?
I think that's a really, really great point. So I think there's a lot of noise. I think there's some people that are walking a fantastic walk,
Mm,
and there's some people that are giving a fantastic talk. I think that's a reality. But I've taken, I'm really passionate about the ED&I space. Pretty much everything I do is to serve the communities and the demographics that probably me and my daughters are as well, and really seeing some amazing different perspectives at the top, and as founders. That benefits everyone, just to say that. I am probably at a point now where I think that actually there's a couple of things that are key. And I think the first thing is that generally people are drawn to like for like. Like that's
mm.
part of our human
Yeah.
nature and characteristic, right? We're tribal, really, aren't we? That's our descendant. And I actually just think people hire people or like to be around people that they can relate to, that might look like them or might have experiences like them, might even support the same football team. Who knows? You've straight away got an affiliation. We talk about being moms. Oh, yeah. We talk about we've both got two daughters. Like there's an affiliation there,
Yeah.
right? So I think that there's a lot of subconsciousness that happens when bringing people to the top. I don't often think it's overtly the plan. I think it's just that, oh, this is really comfortable. We go on, we get each other, let's go. So I think sometimes the knowledge and awareness around that is what can kind of make you think about that yourself as well. So I think that is actually the big factor in terms of changing some of those demographics. Um, the second thing I actually think is around advocacy and change innately for ourselves. So when we talk, you just touched on, we're going heavy here straight away, but you just touched on gender pay gap. And actually, I speak to senior female candidates day in and day out, and it's those senior female candidates that will typically ask for lower salaries than their male counterparts, and are just as qualified, just as experienced, or more experienced than the people they're going against. And there we have to ask, well, who is it to blame then? Because if we're asking for less money, right, and that's because of societal pressures, I want to be really clear about that. And should we, can we, and there's some women that absolutely don't do that, and they are right there, commanding and negotiating, and that's amazing. But generally, that is what I see. I've sat in this industry for 17 years, and I see that theme every day.
I'm really shocked by that, actually, because it's not something that works, because I place leaders and, distinctly 50-50, female and male. And I've never known anyone talk themselves down. If anything, obviously, I'm there to advocate. Maybe that's what you mean by the advocacy. We should be having parity conversations, but that comes down to self-confidence, self-esteem. Like you said, the societal pressures, that you can't achieve what you can achieve if you're a female. It's ludicrous.
100%. But I also think that the senior females that you're speaking to are leaders of effectively consultancy sales businesses.
Yeah.
So I would expect that they have really got high levels of resilience, really had to command a lot of different places and spaces. The senior females that I speak to, some of them are within that commercial capacity, a lot of them aren't.
Right.
And that's the difference, I think. So yeah, I definitely see that. I mean, even to the point, I'm really passionate about female founders, and even to the point where female founders typically pay themselves 35% less than male founders. So again, there's absolutely, and I want to be clear, of course, there's different elements at play, but I always think how empowering it is for us sometimes to kind of be aware of maybe some of our own kind of conditioning, or changing some of our own sort of, some of those own narratives. I think that's really, really powerful.
I mean, it's a segue back to your first point around unconscious bias, that actually so often the unconscious biases are of ourselves, by ourselves.
Yeah.
It's that narrative that we use to ourselves that, why shouldn't you be achieving, your absolute maximum potential? You shouldn't be talking down. This comes down to, I think this actually comes down to, the self-awareness, but also the self-teaching, possibly investing from external coach. There's loads of amazing empowerment coaches out there. I can think of about half a dozen off the top of my head who talk about this very openly. And I don't mean they're the noise, by the way. They're the ones that are, coaching these particularly female founders. But I think that's really interesting. And in terms of the trajectory, the fact that we're having these conversations openly, the fact that people, and it isn't just females having these conversations, I think there is
amazing,
a lot of male advocates.
Allies. Amazing men. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I feel very passionately about it, as you can tell.
No, without a shadow of a doubt. Now, you also mentioned in your introduction, I'm trying to remember the order that you went in, that you are involved in a domestic abuse charity in the West Midlands, and that's something that I follow you on social media, as you know, and I think it's something that when you were in the live event with us in Birmingham, you were very compassionate to yourself in sharing your personal story with it. And I think the vulnerability that you have shown as a leader to talk about your sort of lived experience is what I think attracts you. And I think if more leaders are able to, I guess, see your example of how authentic that makes you.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to leaders that are listening? Because we get so many leaders that do listen who maybe not necessarily your experience of what you went through, but where they've gone through something that makes them vulnerable to their team members and potentially to their customers as well. What would your advice be about doing that? Like what allowed you to share it, I suppose?
Yeah. So thank you for asking that. So I'm a firm believer that you can divulge whatever you want to divulge. So for some people, that might be nothing. People don't always bring their full self to work. When we hear, bring your full self to work, bring your full self to work. But honestly, sometimes it's good to do that. Sometimes it might not be an environment that's conducive of that. That's a reality. Um, but I think for me, Lysha, I spent so much of my life, I was talking to my partner about this morning, which is really strange. So much of my life living in probably secrecy. I had a completely different life going on at home in comparison to the life that I had going on professionally. And the two absolutely didn't cross over. And I was just thinking to myself, right, I can't divulge that to the other. Like, absolutely, I wouldn't fit in. And if I don't fit in some description, I already stand out because, perhaps the demographic is different to the senior leaders there. So how do I, how am I going to be able to progress? That was my thought process then. Now I think, hey, what makes you different makes you stand out. Step
Absolutely.
into that. But I think what happened in full transparency is that I decided to do the apprentice. So I had no social media. I never talk about this actually, but I joined S3, so big global recruitment business. I'd already had a successful kind of number of years at Virgin. And when I joined them, I was different again from their usual hires. All of that had two children, and I was joined them at like 24, 25. I already had a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I thought to myself, right, okay, what can kind of make me fit in? I needed to have a LinkedIn profile, which I'd never had before. I thought, I'm not going to be allowed to put up a picture of myself. So what I did was I pitched to my boss at the time, who me and you both know, I'm going to put a picture of Amelia Earhart up because I knew I was going to have trouble at home if I put a picture of myself up. We used to have to go on meetings with men in cars because we're all men,
Yeah.
in cars because, you do client meetings, it was normal stuff. And I used to pretend that I got travel sick so I could sit in the back of the car so I could put my head down in case anybody saw me. So that was the level of control. Yeah, that was the level of control that was going on in my world that I'd come from. So it's extreme. And that's okay. There's a different environment that's gone on there. So just very extreme. And I had all of that going on whilst I was, of course, no one knew, whilst I was trying to be the top performer. And then I think because I'd lived that life for so many years and lived in that way for so many years, I was not open about it. I came from a background of loyalty. So you just don't discuss these things. You just don't think. And because you're not letting anyone in and discussing any of these things, then you're obviously not getting any other outside perspectives. You're very brainwashed by, this whole situation. And then I left and I did the apprentice. Long journey to that, but I did the apprentice, and I didn't know if I could do the apprentice because, can I just speak super openly?
Of course.
Super openly because my ex-partner was in prison, not to do with me, was in prison for a long period of time, and he's my children's father, and we needed to get permission from him that there wasn't going to be any safeguarding issues. So I still knew that I still, even at that point, was being controlled by circumstances that I'd chosen when I was 16 years old, to be clear. When I chose when I was 16 years old, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to do it. And because of all of that and so many different parties being involved, I only had 5 days to know if I could or I couldn't do it versus the other candidates around me that had, I think, 5 or 6 weeks. There is a big that when you've got a business, 2 children, and you're trying to choose some outfits. So I didn't have time. I didn't have time to process, I'm doing this big show. I was more like, absolutely not. Again, I'm being controlled. I'm going to just do it, and I had great encouragement from my mom, to be fair to her. And what happened, in answer to your question, it's a very roundabout answer, but what happened was, because I did the apprentice, it blew my world open. So all of a sudden, I was in newspapers. My circumstances were in newspapers, and I was in a position where actually, for the first time in my life, after what felt like all of these challenging circumstances had happened, I felt like there was a reason behind it. And now I feel like I'm doing myself and other people that can relate to my circumstances or can't actually a disservice not to be transparent about it, because there's got to be a reason that you've gone through all that trauma and pain to help others. And that's why I'm really passionate about purpose. And why I do talk so transparently. And when I'm speaking about it, I have so many people say, oh God, I can relate. I was at an event yesterday and someone was crying. I've never told anyone that. That for me is like everything, because I needed that. And that wasn't there.
But what, I mean, there's a couple of things, and I'm absolutely covered in goosebumps. And thank you so much for sharing that with us, because you
I'm
know,
even a bit emotional that I don't talk
yeah.
about it, but
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, being in a coercive relationship is, it's emotional abuse, and I think there's a lot of stigma around it. But I think this is why you're such an important DEI advocate, because what you talk about there is shame. And
yes.
people might be thinking, sorry, what is the purpose of this episode today? But actually, as human beings, we hold shame. And as leaders, it's really important to remove that sense of shame of ourselves or the people that we have in our teams, to create a true sense of belonging, which is the whole purpose of why we should educate ourselves in what diversity and inclusion actually means. That you create a safe space for people who, and you as a leader, this is why you're so compassionate, and it's why you are externally with the charities, but also internally with your teams, but to anybody that you ever meet,
Mm,
that that there is no holds barred on what you've experienced, what has happened to you, and then how you respond to it is what makes you that person.
yeah.
Um, so I absolutely applaud you. And I have always believed that, you get two kinds of people from a leadership perspective: those who are happy to share a lot more around their own personal journey, like yourself, like me, myself. I'm
Yeah.
possibly an oversharer, and those that feel guarded and, almost put on that brave face. But to me, that's the ultimate level of hypocrisy. And I think that it's a real shame to miss an opportunity like that. But I also appreciate not everybody, wants to share. But thank you for doing that,
No
because
problem.
it must make people feel safe.
Yeah, and I think all of this stuff plays out in the workplace. That's where the relevance is.
Yeah.
You are sitting next to someone that's has all different circumstances. You are that person. And how does that play out in the workplace? And how can we bring our authentic selves to work? And how is it safe? And how do we have an understanding of something we've never experienced? And sometimes just to hear that, it makes you think, oh, like I would if I was hearing an amazing male leader talk about something, I'd be like, oh, I never even thought about that kind of pressure because I haven't experienced it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that, empathy, we often forget about empathy as a behavior, which, whether you're a leader or a recruiter listening, and I'm so glad that you made that segue back to why I wanted to talk about this, because I think,
Yeah.
to be a great team player, to be a great leader, to be a great future leader or founder, what we're encouraging here is that you create conversations and have a communication culture that there is no shame, and that if we are to bring out the best in ourselves, be real. And, I think I'm not
Yeah.
talking about coming in, I'm not talking about bringing, because you were saying that at the start of that introduction to that bit of the conversation, that we're not talking about being a mood hoover and bringing the problems.
No, no.
That's not what we're talking
No.
about.
Yeah,
There's
no.
a I think there is a big difference. And, this is where, even just from engaging with clients, and getting to know your customers, and, whether that's online or whether that's in real life, just sharing, human experiences. And we can't all experience everything that makes us human, but we can, what you said at the start around, it is psychology that we look to each other and we try and find something that's common. But this goes way beyond that, and it goes way beyond the deeper meaning, which, when I think about the evolution of recruitment, and it'll be happening in your market too, that the AI evolution,
Yeah.
which, can distract from the actual real conversations that we're having, it's those recruiters and leaders that really form that trust on a human level that will be thriving and flourishing as we go through this next evolution.
The way that we get through that evolution and get the best out of it is connection. Everything is about connection. If you're worried about AI, connection, like that is even all the research is showing that. And I also just think for next generations and the way that the workplace is changing. Look, we've seen it. We used to sit in three-piece suits. Well, I didn't, but three-piece suits around us, that was normal. If someone didn't come on an interview with a tie, we'd be like, oh my gosh, like,
Yeah,
we can't put them
absolutely.
forward. And now, we deal with CEOs who are literally in shorts and a t-shirt. Like that was my last meeting, and I didn't even think twice about that. There is an evolution that's happening in the workplace. Like that is a reality. And I think you kind of gotta, yeah, we've got to embrace that. I think part
Absolutely.
of that is what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Now, as an industry, you're at the forefront, I would think, in terms of, the Kaizen mentality, this continuous improvement. I always look to STEM
Yeah.
recruiters to say, what can we do to learn from what those industries are actually doing in terms of whether it's learning, whether it's processes, what, in terms of leadership mentality and mindset, are there any things that your clients and your customers are doing that we can then learn as leaders and recruiters ourselves, just in terms of, how we reinvest back in ourselves?
Yeah, I love that. So I think the continuous improvement piece is massive. So, and we really operate that within our own business on a very small scale in comparison, But it's kind of, we're talking about constructive feedback, we're talking about improvement. I did a speech yesterday. I had two peers there. I was like, "Could you give me some constructive feedback afterwards?" And they like laughed, and I was like, "No, I'm serious.
Being
Like,
serious.
please." Yeah, I'm really serious. Like some development, I'm super open to that. We constantly want to be better. So I'd say that constant drive to how do I get better or how do we get better? And that really does come back from feedback, whether that's from our customers, from
Love
our
that.
peers, from our senior leaders. So I think that's absolutely key. And something else we're seeing with AI, we do a lot in renewables, we do a lot in tech, is innovation. And we
Okay.
hear innovation a lot, but is innovation? And actually, a big part of innovation comes back to having diverse perspectives around the table. So that might not look like, oh, everyone at the table is female or everyone's an ethnic minority. Hopefully there is a nice balance there. But actually, what we're talking about is diverse perspective. So somebody's had a different life journey and experience to you. And that is what's needed to bring different solutions and different innovation to really bring these businesses forwards.
So pleased you said that. As we record this at the end of March,
Yeah.
2025, Lily and my daughter shared a post on diversity on her LinkedIn, and it has blown up. It has truly gone viral.
Wow.
It's had
I didn't
hundreds
see it.
hundreds of comments and likes, and there have been some extremely, I'm going to use this word, she would go, she edits this and publishes the podcast, so she's going to be absolutely cringing at this, but she chastised me for standing up for her and jumping in on that. There was quite a lot of trolls, and then somebody used this word because we've gone through diversity training as a business. We work with Joe Major, who's one of our podcast partners with
Yeah, yeah.
recruitment, so we truly understand as individuals what diversity and inclusion actually really means and how we can then educate our clients. But this particular person jumped in and went, "I can't believe some of these comments," because she shared a photo of me and my two daughters. And
Yeah.
her point was, you might look at this photo and see a mother and two daughters. And apart from the differences, like Izzy's got blue hair and tattoos, and I look like this, but actually, what the three of us could not be more different. And most people got it, like they understood what she was
Yeah.
trying to do. She wasn't defining diversity. She was saying you have to see beyond the appearances. And then somebody used the word cognitive diversity, and that's what actually is Lily was trying to say. But she's 17, she's learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
The neurodiversity, Izzy's got neurodiversity, for example.
Yeah.
The hidden diversity of myself. I'm perimenopause. I'm over 50. I've
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
an autoimmune disease. You wouldn't know any of that by looking at me.
No.
Is the point of what you've just made, that I don't think diversity as a conversation is going anywhere. And yet, as an industry, what we see is so many people are dismissive about it. And this isn't just about commercially attracting future diverse talent. It's actually about how we retain people and look after people.
Yes, yeah, that's a different. That I think that's a slightly different piece, and I'm so pleased you touched on it because it really is. And I think what I get nervous about. I said to you, I'm recording some podcast episodes for our business later, and we're actually with another with a diversity leader, and we're actually going to talk really frankly around Edie and I for this reason, because what I get nervous about is that actually I never want to sit in a room or speak or be in a place where I feel like not everyone has a sense of belonging. And I think sometimes when we talk about Edie and I, there can often be male counterparts, particularly white male counterparts, that feel like they don't belong. Well, that
Yeah,
is complete, or they're being ostracized. Well, that is the
absolutely.
complete opposite of what real belonging is, the complete opposite of it. So, and everyone has their own journey, they have their own story, like that's the reality, have their own challenges. So I totally agree with you. It is about the perspectives, it's about being able to share those, and it's about creating environments where it's safe to do that. And then individuals can decide what they want to bring to work or what they want to bring to the table. That's absolutely fine, but it is safe to do so. Yeah.
I think so, and I agree with you. I think that ultimately we all have a lived experience, and one of the key things that we learn at the early parts of our training is intersectionality. You cannot make assumptions based on someone's appearance as to who they are or what they're about, and it's ludicrous to even think it when you say it out loud. It's like, obviously, but I think it's a really, really nice way to finish the episode. That if I was to conclude what you've just said there, if as a leader, as a recruiter, whatever your position is, as you're listening to this now, it's about us making people feel psychologically safe, that they can come to you, if they confide in you, be responsive, even if you don't know how to respond to the situation they're going through, just listen, you
Yeah,
know?
and businesses are people. We're in the business of people, right? It is every single business is a people business. Like that's the reality. So how you interact with people is absolutely key. So do you know what? I've got to ask you one question. I know we're wrapping up. Can you guess? You might know this, but I say this sometimes when we're talking about biases and things like that. How many biases you might draw when you just meet somebody, so they might not have even really spoken or interacted. Can you guess the amount of conclusions we can subconsciously come to?
Yeah, in terms about a number or a percentage,
A number.
at least 20.
150.
Oh my God.
150. Isn't it crazy? And it doesn't mean that's all happening at the same time. There's 150 kind of conclusions in come. So, and that's why I think it's really interesting to know. You're like, wow, I have to check myself. I have
Yeah.
to check myself. And you're like, oh, okay. So yeah,
But it's very nice sort of we've done a full circle of it. As human beings, we tend to be attracted to people who feel similar, who look similar, but actually it's not a dead cert, and we have to learn to remove our own unconscious bias, even if it's somebody that we think is like us, because nobody has the same life at all.
oh,
Oh, I knew this was going to be
yeah.
focused. Thank you. Will you tell us about your podcast then before you go? Is this going to be
I,
something?
it's under wraps. It's under wraps, but we're going to have our 7th year anniversary, business anniversary, Harper Fox Partners. So we decided to do something special and something exciting.
Oh,
But it is going to be raw, open, transparent conversations are really around conscious leadership and just making us all amazing leaders and business leaders. We all want businesses that thrive and grow and people that thrive and grow. So it's having some really open conversations around that. So I will keep you posted.
well, maybe by the time we get this, we'll be able to reveal it all. But look,
Yeah.
congratulations on your 7 year anniversary. That is an amazing achievement. I bet that's flown.
It has. It has. It's unbelievable. I still think I'm at the do you know I'm sitting right now at the kitchen table that I started this whole journey off on. Look at that.
I love
So
that.
yeah, crazy.
Good for you. And you keep doing what you're doing. We'll
Thanks,
make
Lysha.
sure that our audience have got links to your charities that you are involved with and your business as well. And you carry on shining because you are absolutely wonderful as a human being. Thank you so much for joining us on the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast.